Hey there. Welcome back to our series on editing and editors and what editors do and what editors don't do. I'm John Hartness, and I am the founder and publisher of Falstaff Books, as well as the editor of, I don't know, a few dozen novels of various genres, and the author of, I think we figured out that the next one to release will be my 39th book. So I've seen some stuff, y'all. So last time around, and if you haven't seen that yet, you should make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and then click the little button to go wherever you go to look at things. I don't know, man. I watch a lot of YouTube on my TV, so going places within videos is challenging for me. I am an old, so doing things is challenging. But anyway, if you like what we're doing, please do subscribe, like the video, ring the bell to get notified, all of the things that I'm supposed to say early on to make the algorithm send people here. I don't know, man. But again, this is a three-part video series with a fourth chapter Q&A. So if, as we're going, you come up with any questions, leave them down in the comments, and I or someone who pays more attention to my social media than me will collate all those into a form that I am less likely to lose, and we'll be able to get those answered in part 4. Last time we talked about lead editing and developmental editing. This time we're going to talk about copy editing. This will be a little bit shorter because I don't have to explain to you what editors do and don't do. But a lot of times when people are saying, this book needs an editor, they don't really understand what an editor does. And if you heard that scuffle along my hardwoods, it's cat. It's always cat. Good God, Gandalf. Kids, man. So a lot of times when someone says, I need to find an editor, what they mean is they need a copy editor. And that's because they don't understand that there are multiple phases of editorial and that not everybody's good at everything. For example, I'm a pretty darn good line editor, story editor, developmental editor. I am hot garbage as a copy editor. Same reason when I did theater for a lot of years, I was a really good lighting designer, a pretty solid director, and a god-awful stage manager. Copy editing is where the devil lives, because copy editing is about the details. And that's not my strong suit editorially. So I don't do copy edits and I don't do proofreads because that's even more granular and more detail oriented. I'm more a big picture guy, more a idea guy, more a let's have fun and blow stuff up and make sure the words that we're using are the best words we can use guy. I'm not the when did Walmart stop being hyphenated guy? When did Dragon Con legally change their name to have a hyphen or no longer have an asterisk or however they change their name? Does this character's hair color stay the same throughout the book? What about eye color, height, weight, name, middle name, spelling? Your copy editor is the person who is really in charge of those things. Your copy editor is also the person who, at least with us, your copy editor is one of the people who starts building the style guide for the book. Every publisher has a style guide, a way that they do things, because it's not as simple as what is and is not grammatically correct. For example, I live in the United States and I live in North Carolina. So for me, color is spelled C-O-L-O-R. If I lived in Great Britain, color would be C-O-L-O-U-R. Those things are both correct. What if I'm publishing a book written by a British author, and the book is set in England? Well, we tend to, in those cases, use the British spellings. Sometimes it's because the author cannot get those extraneous U's out of their system no matter how hard we try. And sometimes it's because it feels more authentic to the book. But neither of those is really incorrect. Your copy editor is the one who's going to tell you that in the United States, gray, like my beard, is typically spelled G-R-A-Y. In Europe, it's typically G-R-E-Y. E for Europe, A for America. Your copy editor is the person who's going to tell you whether or not blonde has an E at the end or not. Your copy editor is the person who should make sure that they're reading your book in detail and that they're marking the things that they are or are not expert in. Your copy editor is the person in charge of making sure your gun stuff is right, if you didn't already. Many, many writers don't know bupkis about guns. And many of those writers who don't know bupkis about guns write characters that know everything there is to know about guns. I am guilty of this. I am not a gun guy. I own a shotgun because I mentioned I live in North Carolina, right? I've always lived in a home with a shotgun. But I don't own any handguns. I've never fired a semi-automatic handgun. I don't own any rifles. I have fired many. So I am not an expert on guns. I have friends who are experts on guns, and I have other friends who are experts on what bullets do to the human body. Those two camps of people are typically not the same person. The guy who can tell you the muzzle velocity of an AR-15 is probably not the same guy who can tell you how long it's going to take you to remove the round from someone's thigh if they get shot with an AR-15. Different skill sets. But your copy editor is in charge of making sure that your book is consistent, that your facts and your continuity are straight. I am notorious for screwing up middle names, and I've worked with the same set of editors for better than a decade now, and they know my idiosyncrasies. In other words, they know what I suck at, and they fix it for me. They save me. That's what your copy editor is there to do. Your copy editor is not typically the person who's questioning your word choice, but if there is something that you say that doesn't make sense, or there's something going on in the plot that doesn't track, your copy editor may very well point that out because it's part of their job. Everyone in the process, at least with us, at least with Falstaff Books, everyone in the process is not only empowered to raise those questions, they are encouraged. Because if I'm the lead editor on a book, and let's say Darren Kennedy is the author, well, Darren and I have probably been going back and forth about this same book for several months before it makes it to copy edits. By the time we're done, I'm almost as close to the book as the author. That means I'm going to lose perspective. So if the copy editor comes in and they don't understand what's happening because my editorial and the author's words don't make it clear, then it's incumbent upon them to raise that question. But just like with your lead editor, your developmental editor, they're not changing your book. They are making suggestions. A copy editor's suggestions carry a lot of weight. with a publisher, though, because they're the ones who are the keeper of the style guide. And the style guide is law-ish. Here's how we've set things up. I can't speak for how other presses have set things up, and they probably are all slightly different. Typically, fiction deals stylistically based off of the Chicago Manual of Style. That's opposed to the ALA, American Library Association, I think, style guide, or the Associated Press style guide, which is primarily journalism. Notable differences: the Chicago Manual of Style uses the Oxford comma, wherein a panda eats, comma, shoots, comma, and leaves. Ergo, Oxford comma, killer panda. Eats, shoots, and leaves, no commas, herbivore. Chicago Manual of Style also is more forgiving with how you refer to characters, which is really good in prose fiction because you're going to be using those names a lot. So you're going to not want to refer to someone as Hartness. That gets boring. Chicago Manual of Style typically says refer to someone by their first name. Hartness Manual of Style says you should refer to someone by their full name at least once, and then come up with multiple different ways to refer to them that are still clear and also distinctive enough to stay interesting for your reader. But your copy editor's in charge of not just making sure that you as a writer are adhering to the Chicago Manual of Style, they're also in charge of keeping the house style guide. We have things in the Falstaff Books style guide where I or my editorial staff have arbitrarily decided this is how we're going to do things. Because sometimes it doesn't matter whether you make one choice or another, but you want to be consistent. Toward versus towards. You can walk towards something. You can walk towards something. Both are completely acceptable grammatically. We choose to walk toward things at Falstaff. That's part of our house style guide. We also choose to only go forward or backward. We don't go backwards. That's part of our house style. And the hierarchy we've set up is that Chicago Manual of Style trumps the writer's whim and their third grade English teacher. House style guide trumps Chicago Manual of Style in cases where there are discrepancies. Author's voice trumps both, because if someone is writing in a very distinctive narrative voice or a distinctive regional dialect, that's going to trump all of that. And then dialogue is outside of the style guide because people speak in dialogue incorrectly all the time. God knows I do. Then Hartness's whim trumps all of those things. It trumps voice, it trumps house style, it trumps CMOS, it trumps author's third grade English teacher, because I'm the one paying to produce the books. So if we end up at loggerheads about whether or not you want your character to walk towards something or towards something, I'm going to win that argument because I get to say no. You don't have to publish the book with us. I don't have to publish your book, even if it's under contract. If we come to an impasse, we can walk away from the project. It's not a big deal. It may be to you. It may be to me. I may have invested dozens, hundreds of hours working on a project. But I'd rather walk away than release a subpar product. And I hope that you would feel the same way. We've never had to do this. We've never had to walk away from a project because of a disagreement between an editor and an author. It'll probably come to that at some point. You know, a million monkeys banging on a million typewriters are eventually going to produce an omelet. That's how that saying goes, right? But so far, I haven't had to stamp down my editorial decree of, no, we're not doing it that way. I want the author to be happy with the book, but I also want us not to get ripped on producing a book that's of poor quality. So we have conversations. Now, what happens when an author and editor disagree? Well, if you're self-publishing, who cares? You're the publisher and the author. You're the final say. If you're working with a press, though, there's other people that are invested in this concept, and you're going to have a real conversation. I suggest that you don't draw arbitrary lines in the sand. It's kind of like a meme I've seen a lot recently, where someone looks at someone else and says, oh, is this the hill you're going to die on? And the other person responds, someone is. Because that's the power in every negotiation rests with the person most willing to walk away from the bargaining table. I've seen this work on anything from a $25 comic book sale to a multi-million-dollar theatrical equipment sale. The person who's willing to get up and walk away has all the power. Whether or not they choose to use it, that's on y'all. So your copy editor goes through the book bit by bit, word for word, with a fine-tooth comb, looking for all the inconsistencies. And they are not going to do a whole lot of, maybe you want to use this word, maybe you've repeated this too much. That's not as much of a copy editor thing as it is a lead editor thing. Sometimes it'll happen, but most of the time it's going to be, hey, your comma's in the wrong place. Hey, your comma's still in the wrong place. Hey, your comma's in the wrong place here too. Hey, Word autocorrects a ton of these dialogue tags to be capitalized. That's all wrong. You don't capitalize dialogue tags if they're continuing a sentence. You get what I'm saying. Your copy editor goes through the document, finds as many of those inconsistencies and errors as they can, and they point them out to you. Then the document comes back to you for you to accept or reject all those changes. When I get a copy edited manuscript back, I make my first run through pretty quickly. I know what my weaknesses are as a writer, and one of them is commas. I think that they should be used like garlic and sprinkled liberally through everything. Reason number 412 why I'm not a copy editor. So as I'm blowing through the document the first time, I'm just checking the margins. Deleted a comma, yep, accept. Deleted a comma, accept. Added a comma, accept. Deleted a comma, accept. You'll note that there's about a 3-to-1 ratio on how many times my copy editors delete commas as opposed to adding commas. And that tracks across, 38 books so far. That's about how we're averaging. That pass, for me, is very quick. I know the things that I miss a lot. Word automatically capitalizing he said or she said when it doesn't need to be capitalized, especially if it's a dialogue tag that ends in a question or when the line of dialogue ends in a question mark or an exclamation point. Not an explanation point. That's this whole damn video. Anyway, those things I can blow through the whole document. Then I go back and then I see the word choice, the repetition, the inconsistencies, then I go through and I accept or reject all of those changes. Sometimes, especially with repetition, I'm doing it for emphasis, so I want to keep that repetition. Then I go back through a third time and I start addressing comments. Because sometimes if, hey, you spelled Mr. Smith's name S-M-I-T-H on page 3, but S-M-Y-T-H-E on page 7. Which is it? Well, I can't accept or reject that. I have to make that determination. Hey, you have used 4 different names for Bubba the Monster Hunter's sister in book 4. Which one would you like to stay with? Okay. That's an actual note I got. I think I only used 3 names for the sister over the course of the book. But, yeah. The other thing that the copy editor does is they build the Bible for the book series. So they go through and words that you've invented, your copy editor puts them in the style guide. Your copy editor makes a note for each character with their height, their hair color, eye color, anything that you have made. I find this very useful, especially since copy editors kind of come and go more frequently than lead editors, at least at small presses. So having that document by the previous copy editor is very helpful to us. My style guide for the Black Knight Chronicles has, I think it's up to like 8 pages just of invented profanity. Because you really need to know whether or not ass clown is hyphenated, and douche nozzle, whether those kinds of insults are hyphenated. For the record, neither of them are. But you document that in the style guide for the series, and your copy editor is doing that for you. So if you get a document back from a copy editor that you've hired or that your publisher has hired, let's say it maybe only has 5 or 10 comments or 5 or 10 corrections in a full novel, ask somebody what happened. Ask somebody where the rest of the notes are. This happened one time. I got an email from an author who had just gotten their copy edits back and said, hey, after about the 2/3 mark, and he gave me a page number, there are no other tracked changes. There's at least 1 per page for the first 2/3 of the book. But did the editor just not finish reading the book? Turned out the editor had sent an old save file as when they turned it in. And the production manager didn't look at it because, well, at that point I was our production manager. And I got a little bit going on. Also, I don't want to read every book we have ever published, and I certainly don't want to read them 3 times. Because I'm not going to read it before acceptance, and then after lead edits, and then after copy edits, and then read the final version. I do read most of the books that we publish, and the ones that I don't read, it's purely a matter of time. Reading is not a fast thing to do. So I don't get to everything, especially not when I'm editing usually 10 to 15 novels a year. So if you don't get notes from your copy editor, if there aren't any changes in the document, they probably didn't do their job all that well. And you need to call them out on that. Maybe you got a copy editor who doesn't understand what you're doing or the genre you're working in. It happens. Just a nice email, just a little email to the publisher saying, hey, I think this might not be a good editorial fit, and here's why. Okay, well, we won't use that person to edit your next book. It's fine. It's not always a good fit. As long as you approach these conflicts and these questions in a professional fashion, you can absolutely dislike a copy edit. You can dislike a copy editor. I've sent emails to other publishers saying, hey, I don't want to be a douche, but I also don't want to work with this copy editor ever again. They seem like they're solid in things that are grounded in the real world, but I don't think they're a good editor for urban fantasy because they're correcting basic pop culture vampire stuff. And if you're going to edit urban fantasy, you kind of need to know a little bit about pop culture vampires. They're kind of a big deal in urban fantasy. I know, the whole industry says vampires are dead. And every vampire writer out there says, yeah, we know they're dead, jackass. We write vampires, they're dead. But they still sell. So that's what a copy editor does. They're focused on continuity and consistency, and they are another step in making your book really shine. So if you want more information about this, be sure to like, subscribe, and if there's anything that you have questions about that I've said today, leave a comment down below. And until then, peace out, nerds.